Welcome back to the Grease Goblins Reread channel. Today's video, we're going to be hitting Catelyn VII, A Clash of Kings. And yes, sadly, this is our last chapter of Catelyn's POVs for the entire book. It's a kind of a crazy decision from George, just given the fact that this chapter ends on a huge cliffhanger, and also just given the fact that we're not really going to see Catelyn's reaction to some of the other events happening during the War of the Five Kings. It's interesting, given we still have, a good, in my bigger book anyway, we still have at least 100 pages, and so Catelyn, very differently than book one. Whereas in book one, it's this big, heroic moment for both Robb and Catelyn, whereas on a reread, yes, there's those undertones of uncertainty and tension as Robb is being named a king. In this book, it's a lot more, the tone is heavier, it feels like a chapter of despair, where even though things are kind of going right for the Stark camp, it's not at the same time, given the news that we're going to hear from Catelyn, to really be the whole focal point of this chapter. The idea that Bran and Rickon are dead. And it's an interesting concept just because us as an audience, we haven't even seen Bran and Rickon actually, be killed or anything. We haven't even seen the Theon chapter yet that we're going to get in the next chapter about what actually occurred. So I think it's another one of those really interesting ways that George reveals things. So for instance, the way we're going to learn about Robb marrying Jane Westerling is really interesting because you thought it would be through Catelyn, right? But it's not actually going to be through Catelyn. We're going to hear a little bit about that with Arya and her last chapter at Harrenhal. And it's very interesting the way George does information. So for instance, we actually learn about Bran and Rickon's death in the last chapter with Tyrion, but here's where it has actual impact, and it kind of motivates this entire chapter that we've been building up to for Catelyn. So this gets us into page 589. The great hall of Riverrun felt hollow and desolate as Catelyn and Brienne shared a solitary supper. The massive chamber meant for feasts and gatherings seemed to swallow their voices. Only 3 torches still burned, a 4th had guttered out, leaving deep shadows clinging to the walls. And it's really great because George has Catelyn's inner feelings be shown in the setting. Even though it's cheery outside of the hall. Everyone's out in the yard, they're drinking to Edmure's great victory and Robb's victories in the west. In the Great Hall, Catelyn is alone. There's not even servants here. They've been dismissed to go to the feasts. In a lot of ways, it really is to reflect the character of Catelyn. Catelyn inside feels broken, completely desolate, but everyone around her, life is still going on, and even people are extremely happy. It's a really great way that George has a lot of great writing skills that he uses in this chapter, and I never remember this chapter as being one of the best of the book, but it really is. And this is a longer chapter. This video is going to be really long because I just know when I talk about Catelyn's chapters, I relate to them so much, and I love talking about all the different parts of Catelyn's chapters, that these videos just tend to be longer for her, and especially in a bigger chapter. Get your snacks, guys. That's all I'll say. Let's get back into it, though. Catelyn sat with her eyes fixed on her wine goblet. She lifted it to her lips, but found the vintage thin and sour. It offered no real comfort to Catelyn. And that's the other part of it, is the wine. Even the simple thing of the wine tastes sour. Everything is going wrong for Catelyn, and Catelyn can't find any real comfort. Across the long table sat Brienne of Tarth, silent and dutiful. She ate with a soldier's precision, each bite deliberate, as if this meal were no different from sharpening a blade or mending a strap of armor. Between them stood the empty high seat of Lord Hoster Tully, vacant as the rest of the hall. Even the servants had been dismissed. Catelyn had given them leave to join the celebrations outside. And again, just painting that idea that not only is Hoster about to die because he's not being able to go in his high seat, so it reminds Catelyn of that, but really, there's just no one here. There's no one for Catelyn to turn to talk to in this dark moment. And of course, none of these people know that Catelyn has just lost both of her sons. But still, even if they did, for Catelyn, it's one of those feelings where you don't even want to be around people giving you pity and all this other stuff. And they might be meaning well, like Brienne's going to mean well in this chapter when she tries to comfort Catelyn, but Catelyn has nobody to turn to. There's nobody that she trusts that can actually understand what she feels like is going on. From beyond the thick stone walls came faint echoes of laughter and song. The people of Riverrun were feasting in the courtyard. Sir Desmond had brought up 20 casks from the cellars, and the small folk toasted Robb's victory at the crag and Edmure Tully's approaching return. All seems to be going well for the Stark camp, But again, Catelyn even seems to be annoyed by this. People outside of her own are able to have enjoyment and happiness, and that just builds Catelyn's resentment. And if any of you have been like really depressed or you've been in a state of deep grief, you really understand this. Because it's this feeling not necessarily that she's mad at people being happy. It's more of a reasoning of, why can't I be happy? Why do these bad things keep happening to me? It's that feeling of despair that Catelyn feels. Catelyn could not bring herself to begrudge them their joy. They do not know, she thought, and if they did, why should they care? And that's the other point of it, is none of these people have ever known Bran or Rickon. They're just names to them. And so it gets back to the point of that. I was like, yes, people may feel bad for you. They will offer their condolences to Catelyn, but do they really care? That's something I've always found really tough about grief is, when you lose people in your life, people mean well when they try to, cheer you up and do all this other stuff, but they don't necessarily know the person you're grieving over. It's a whole different thing. And so grief is a very interesting device that George uses in this chapter to get us to kind of think critically about that. Catelyn thinks about how they had never known her sons, had never seen Bran climbing the towers of Winterfell, her heart rising and falling with every perilous grasp, had never heard his laughter or seen little Rickon's fierce determination to be just like his brothers. Her eyes dropped to the untouched food before her, trout wrapped in bacon, greens of turnip and fennel, peas and onions, and fresh baked bread still steaming from the ovens. All of it might as well have been ash. Even food brings no comfort to Catelyn, and nothing really can. No parent should have to see their child die or have to outlive their child. It's a horrible thing, and Catelyn is going through that. And even though we know that Bran and Rickon aren't actually dead, how is Catelyn going to know that? She's being told by somebody she trusts that they are dead, that there is no hope of even trying to assume that they might have lived. They are dead. That's what we've been told. She thought bitterly to herself, I have become a sour woman. I take no joy in mead, nor meat, and song and laughter have become suspicious strangers to me. And think about all that this chapter is going to do for Catelyn in the future. When she comes back as Lady Stoneheart, it's these emotions, it's this side of Catelyn that comes out. This side of Catelyn that has no relief, that is consumed by anger, grief, pain, all of these different things. Grief had remade her. She felt hollow, like a shell that once held warmth and love, but now only contained pain. There is nothing that Catelyn can really do. She feels there's no way forward for herself. And when you think about why she does the decision she's going to do in terms of, releasing Jaime, it's because of these emotions. She's not thinking straight, obviously. And there's no one else to help her with these emotions because nobody even really knows. And so I really love that the way that George even writes the idea that Catelyn isn't hating all these other people. She isn't somebody that, is just an awful person. It's just she at this point more has her own self-hatred. Think about what she's also going through. She's not going to specifically mention it in this chapter, but she will in A Storm of Swords. Is you think about all the decisions Catelyn's made up to this point. She could have gone back to Winterfell multiple times, and probably should have in a lot of ways. And that would have allowed her to have seen her sons, or maybe it would have changed the future of the series. If she was the mother to her younger sons and they're at Winterfell, could things have gone a little differently? And that's definitely possible. Definitely could have changed a lot. But that's something that Catelyn's going to have to wrestle with. But Catelyn thinks again, there's an empty place within me where my heart once was. She realized, staring into the shadows that crept along the cold stone walls. What does that all remind you of? Lady Stoneheart. Her heart isn't there anymore. And we're also being told about the shadows that are creeping on the cold stone walls. Combine those two, what do you get? Stoneheart. George is very clever in the way he writes things for us to pick up. And when we reread them, we're like, oh, wow, okay, that's where that came from. What a surprise. But as we get into page 590, even the sound of Brienne's quiet chewing began to grate on Catelyn until she could no longer bear it. And you might be thinking, well, Catelyn's this horrible person. She can't even stand Brienne eating and all this stuff. It's just these little things that when you're feeling very depressed and you're feeling like Catelyn is, consumed by grief, it's just any of these little minor annoyances that just sets you off because you're already, lashing out at yourself. And any time that you see somebody, usually, and this isn't for everybody, but a lot of times people are struggling and they're going through depression, they're going through grief, they're going through a rough time in their life, financially, whatever. A lot of times it comes out as they're not angry at you. They're angry at themselves, or they're angry at things that are out of their control. And that's what you see here with Catelyn. But even Catelyn is able to compose herself and sets down her goblet and said softly, "Brienne, I am no fit company. Go join the rebels if you would. Drink a horn of ale and dance to Rymon's harping." See, like, Catelyn doesn't just like send her off or do any of the stuff that seems disrespectful. She says it in a polite way. In a way that, yes, Catelyn wants to be alone, but she doesn't want to put down Brienne. And that's something I really love about Catelyn, is that she is able to still have some of that nice ladiness to her that will eventually go away when, well, the Red Wedding happens. Brienne looks startled, tearing apart a hunk of black bread with her big hands. "I am not made for rebels, my lady," she said quietly. Her eyes drop to the torn pieces, but she does say, "If you command it, but she is cut off. Brienne is very uncomfortable with social gatherings, events, and you can understand completely because of her past with Renly's camp and the horrible things that were done there. And even you think about all the way back when she was younger, when she danced with Renly, Brienne is somebody that just doesn't like big gatherings because she sticks out like a sore thumb, and because people don't treat her right. All these people look at her suspiciously because of the way she dresses and who she is. But either way, Catelyn sensed her awkwardness. "I only thought you might enjoy happier company than mine." Brienne kind of dismisses this, saying that she is content, and she used the bread to soak up bacon grease from her trout. But after a long silence, Catelyn doesn't know why she decided to speak or even to say the thing she's going to, but she did. She tells Brienne that there was a bird in the morning. Brienne looked up. "Is it news of King's Landing?" That's obviously what anybody would be thinking. If there is news, and it's something that Catelyn is willing to share, it must be about the state of the war. But Catelyn notes that it isn't. The bird came from Castle Cerwyn, from Sir Roderick my Castellan. Catelyn's voice at this point seemed to go flat and dull, and she even thinks dark wings, dark words. She notes that Roderick had gathered what power he could and is marching on Winterfell to take the castle back. But this was the hard part. She couldn't say what actually was on her mind and what it was really about. She paused, her hands trembling around her cup. "But he said, he wrote, he told me." She just couldn't get it out, because speaking it means you're putting it out into existence, that it's actually happened now. So many people would love to deny the truth of the situation, something that Catelyn is going to be reminded of by Jaime in this chapter. Speaking it makes it plainly the truth. You know, think about something like this. Let's go a whole different route. Catelyn right now is talking about grief and loss. In another route, think about you lose a relationship. So maybe you were dating somebody for a few years, or maybe you got divorced from somebody, and you don't even want to speak it to your family or your friends, because once you do that, it kind of settles in. It becomes that this is officially what happened. I myself can totally relate to this. The last relationship that I was in, it was one of those things where it didn't really hit me right away, where it was like, I don't even know why, but it was one of those things where just, I didn't process it until it's like, I told my mother, what happened. And then it was just like, everything started coming out. So I think that is the thing that is so interesting about the way George writes Catelyn, because she's so real. This is such a great way to start the chapter, because Catelyn can't really get it out. But Brienne tried to lean forward gently, asking if it was news of her sons. And this was the moment. Catelyn closed her eyes as the words were knives in her throat, each one cutting her as she forced them out. Catelyn doesn't say that Bran and Rickon are dead. She still can't even utter their names in that sentence, but she says that she has no sons but Robb. Brienne froze, horror dawning across her face. And if you're Brienne, you don't like social situations. That's quite obvious. But how do you respond to, again, Catelyn and Brienne have been having a growing relationship, but they haven't known each other that long. And Brienne is somebody that is at an age where she's still coming into herself. How do you comfort a grieving mother over the loss of her children? It's impossible. And so Brienne doesn't know exactly what to do, and she kind of acts a bit awkwardly, but you understand why. Catelyn, it seems almost just immune or without any emotion, says that Bran and Rickon had tried to escape, but they were taken at a mill on the Acorn Water as Theon Greyjoy has mounted their heads in the walls of Winterfell. Now it's been said. Catelyn can't unsay it, and these things have now happened. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Theon Greyjoy, who had eaten at their table since he was a boy of 10. Saying it aloud had made it real, and Catelyn thinks that she has now made it true. And that is the case. At this point, there's no denying it anymore. Catelyn has spread that, and everything starts to break down. Exactly what I told you in my personal story with a breakup. At this point, Catelyn's eyes filled with tears. Her vision began to blur. As Brienne reached across the table, she hesitated, then drew back before their fingers touched, as if her comfort would be unwelcome. And that's the true thing. If you're Brienne, you don't know what Catelyn wants at this point. You don't know if Catelyn just wants to be left alone, if you should try to maybe hug her. And Brienne hasn't known Catelyn long enough to pick up on those signals. So, like, for instance, if you have been friends with somebody since you were 5 years old, you know how they can kind of respond to things. Like, you know them more to where if you were to, like, hug them or try to help them, you know more of how that would be received. Whereas Catelyn and Brienne's relationship is more like, okay, well, Brienne is, in a lot of ways, a servant to Catelyn. It's like almost if you were going to try to comfort your boss at work. Like, there's a weird dynamic there. Like, you don't know what is correct in the situation. And that's what Brienne's kind of struggling with. Brienne tries to say that there were no words, but her sons are now with the gods. And this is going to spark a very interesting point for Catelyn specifically. Because another point of grief especially is, if you're somebody that really believes in religion, this is a point where it might question your religion. Something traumatic happens to your family or your friends or your personal life, whatever. It makes you question your own beliefs. Why would something happen that's this horrible? If there is a higher power, why do they allow things to happen the way that they do? And that's exactly what starts page 591 with Catelyn. Catelyn's grief turned into bitterness as she snapped that no god worth worshipping would allow such cruelty. Rickon was a baby. Bran hadn't even woken up the last time that Catelyn had even seen him. For Catelyn, it's almost like Bran died when he got pushed from the tower. And that's kind of horrible to think about with Catelyn. But now she would never see him wake again. She would never see her young children. And that is what's motivating Catelyn. What god would allow your children to be taken from you at such young ages, and especially with a betrayal by Theon, and the war now getting to be a really hard point for the Starks? You have the Greyjoys in the north, you have the Lannisters in the south, as well as Stannis at this point. What can they do? And that's what Catelyn's going to go through. But Catelyn's really interesting because she'll have moments both in this chapter where she thinks, very negatively about there being a higher power, and then she'll also back it up later on when she talks to Jaime. So it's just interesting the way that it shows that these moments of turmoil really breed a lot of conflict in your beliefs overall. Catelyn showed Brienne her scarred hands, recalling how a man once tried to murder Bran in his bed. Before the boys' direwolf saved them both, she assumes that Theon must have slain the wolves too. As she continues saying her girls, she said quietly, no longer had theirs. And that's the point of it. There's a reason why when we get into A Storm of Swords, why Catelyn is so gung-ho about Grey Wind always being at Robb's side, because that's viewed as Robb's protection. Now, it's an interesting note that Catelyn makes here is that the idea that, wait, what happened to Summer and Shaggy Dog? Were the direwolves killed? Because if they weren't, it seems very odd that Bran and Rickon would then be found dead, but not the wolves. So that's an important part, and Catelyn's kind of just making an assumption, of course. She's been told they're dead. She's not going to realize, oh, there's this whole big plot going on at Winterfell. The talk then shifted to Sansa and Arya. Sansa had always been ladylike, loving songs and nights, her auburn hair always shining like copper in the torchlight. Arya, by contrast, was wild, half wolf pup, half boy, always scabbed and stubborn, blurting whatever came to mind. And Catelyn finally reaches the point that she hasn't been at in the entire series. Catelyn has always held out hope for Arya, but she thinks that Arya must be dead too. And this breaks Catelyn because now she's not only admitted that 2 of her children are dead, she's now admitted a third is dead. So for Catelyn, all she really has left at this point is Sansa and Robb. And Sansa right now is a prisoner of war. Her father is about to die. Her mother has already been dead for many years. Her husband is dead. Catelyn has very little family left. Lysa basically doesn't even count at this point anymore. Lysa has basically abandoned Catelyn. So that's what Catelyn is feeling. She's feeling like this War of the Five Kings has taken everything from her. Rage then replaced her sorrow. She wanted vengeance, and this is the most Stoneheart thing you're going to get in this chapter. She said she wanted Theon to be killed first, then Jaime, then Cersei, then Tyrion, and everyone. That is the moment where Catelyn has been so consumed by all these different things, and even throughout this book, when Catelyn is offered, for instance, like Cersei's head when Stannis and Renly take the throne, or all that kind of stuff, Catelyn has always said, as long as justice has been done, all that, she doesn't care. Here, you have that turn, because Catelyn is now tired of it. She can't think rationally about things like that anymore. She wants revenge, something to fill the hollow feeling that she feels. Brienne hesitantly said the queen might pity her when she heard the news and perhaps maybe return her daughters. And Catelyn only smiled sadly at the idea, saying innocence like Brienne's was rare. But she continued saying that Robb would avenge his brothers with ice, Ned's Valyrian greatsword, though she herself would take the joy and strike the blow herself. And that's the other part of it is, Brienne is such a pure character. She's such a good character that she can be innocent in these moments where obviously we know Cersei does not care really at all about Catelyn. It's not going to return Sansa because of this. And we saw that really in the last chapter. But it's Catelyn kind of realizing that. It's Catelyn seeing some of that innocence that her sons had. And so in a lot of ways, Catelyn, if she had been able to live longer and Brienne had actually been able to return to Catelyn, I think Brienne would have kind of replaced some of her children, would have been seen as a daughter type figure for Catelyn. But as we know, the series is not going to go that way at all. Staring at her hands, she added almost absently, I've sent him wine. And this is where you start to get to the point where Catelyn just seems kind of crazy in this chapter. Inside of her head, we know exactly what she's thinking, but you've got to remember, all Brienne is hearing is Catelyn wants to kill all these people. And then she starts staring at her hands, looking for something. And all she said is, I've sent him wine. What? And Brienne is even more confused by this, saying, wine? Who? Robb? Theon Greyjoy? Who are you sending this wine to? And as we get into page 592, Catelyn reveals that her plan is for the Kingslayer. She's going to use the exact same tactic she used on Cleo's Frey, try to get them drunk, and then interrogate them and get information. She wants to speak with Jaime and tells Brienne to come to her chambers at midnight. Brienne is surprised at the late hour, but Catelyn answers, once again very coldly, in the dungeons, all hours are midnight. And even herself, she feels as though every waking hour feels like midnight. There's a darkness that is around Catelyn inside of her own heart. She leaves Brienne to finish her meal and walks out of the empty hall alone. Outside, the castle is loud with drunken celebration, men shouting Tully and toasting Robb's victories, but Catelyn feels none of it. Inside her heart, she's consumed with loss and anger, and she's also a little frustrated by people already seem to be saying Edmure's the new lord, and that Hoster doesn't even exist anymore. And to an extent, Hoster is not being seen by anybody in the castle. He's basically more dead than he is alive at this point. And so, I understand Catelyn totally, but for a lot of these people, it's Edmure's the new person. He's been in charge for pretty much the whole story at this point. She climbs to her father's solar, where Maester Vyman tells her that Lord Hoster is asleep after a cup of dream wine. Catelyn says it makes no difference. He's already more dead than alive anyway, though still more alive than her murdered sons. The Maester offers her something to help her sleep, but she refuses, saying she will not sleep away her grief, as she sends him to join the festivities instead, choosing to stay with her father alone. This is another thing that grief does to people. It just makes them act, very weirdly. People do things that are just weird when they're full of grief, because you just don't act rationally, and especially this with Catelyn saying she's not going to get any sleep. I think most people, when you go through a traumatic moment or you go through horrors in your life or the worst moments, sleep is just hard because your mind is running and emotions are high and all that kind of stuff. And that's why, for instance, I love A Song of Ice and Fire, but my favorite movie is The Fellowship of the Ring because it is my comfort movie. It is my movie where, at the worst points of my life, I've always turned to it and it's helped me get through that night or whatever. So, when both of my grandparents died, I didn't ever actually have grandparents on my father's side, so I was very close to my grandparents on my mother's side. Um, they were like my first real losses. Like I had been to other people's funerals, but it wasn't to people like I knew that well or I was close with. But so for my grandparents, it was one of those things where, especially with my grandfather, when he died before my grandmother. His death was a lot more traumatic. It was a lot more of a surprise. The way things went down were very. I struggle from saying traumatic because it wasn't like I think what other people would go through in a traumatic death or passing. Like he was, older. He wasn't that old. He was actually very healthy, but nature has its ways, I guess. But like The Fellowship of the Ring was a movie where I was home alone. My mother and my father stayed over with my grandmother, and so I was alone. And I just remember I was like, well, we're gonna watch The Fellowship of the Ring. I'm gonna pull. I didn't have a big mattress at the time. I pulled in I think it was like a twin mattress on the floor and fell asleep to The Fellowship of the Ring, and that's how my family found me the next morning. So it's those things that can help you get through it. It's the coping mechanisms, and that's why The Fellowship of the Ring is always my favorite movie. But getting back into the story, Catelyn sits beside Lord Hoster's bed, holding his frail, veined hand, feeling the faint warmth under his translucent skin. She knows that soon that even his warmth will fade. She whispers that she has no one to talk to anymore. The gods give her no answers, and she kisses his hand, remembering better days. And that is I think, the saddest line of the entire chapter. Just the whole point of there's no person to talk to anymore. She doesn't have friends. She doesn't have family, especially people older than her that she can talk to. The Blackfish would be a great person for her right now, but the Blackfish is, he's at war at this moment with Robb. And so it just feels very somber for reading Catelyn at this point. She begins to speak softly to him about a childhood memory, a foggy day when she and Lysa became lost riding back from Seaguard. They had been frightened, swallowed by the mist, until Peter Baelish rode back to find them and led them home. And this is going to have two reasons as to why George includes this story. The first reason is a reflection of what Catelyn feels now. She feels lost with no path in front of her. But unlike in this story, where she had somebody that could rescue her, there's nobody to rescue her this time. There is no path forward that she can lean on. She has to make her own path. And unfortunately, that's going to make her do the wrong decision, but that's what she's feeling. And the other second part of this is Littlefinger has been somebody she's always trusted since they grew up, and it's led her to make more bad decisions in this story. And we're going to see that come to a head. Because one thing that Catelyn's going to investigate in this chapter heavily is the idea of who tried to assassinate Bran. And if that isn't Tyrion, or Jaime, or Cersei, why would Littlefinger lie also about Tyrion's dagger? So there's a lot of things here. This is a subtle story that you don't maybe necessarily think is a big moment for this chapter, but it has two main reasons that really help us as an audience understand the chapter. As we get into page 593, alone with her sleeping father, Catelyn whispers that there is no one left to find her now. She must find her own way, and it is so hard. She doesn't know what to do, and in a lot of ways, maybe she shouldn't do anything. Maybe she should just grieve and let others do the war, Edmure and Robb, but that's never been the way Catelyn's been able to do things. She remembers the Stark words and says quietly, "Winter has come for me." Her heart aches as she laments that Robb must now fight both the Greyjoys and the Lannisters, and wondering even what it's all for. This war has taken everything from her, most of her family, and all it is a gold hat and an iron chair. All these things that don't really matter in the long term. Catelyn wishes only for peace, her daughter's safety, Robb married to some homely Frey girl, her little boy's alive again, but the words break off. She wants, and that's the issue. She wants a perfect life for all of her children and her family to be reunited, but it's impossible. She knows that. And you even see how she's imagining all these things. She already in this chapter has admitted that Arya is most likely dead. We know Arya's not dead, but given logically, there's been no spottings of Arya publicly since the first book. Likely she's dead. And so you're seeing Catelyn wishing for these things, and that's what's going to lead her to make a bad decision in releasing Jaime. It's that desperation that she's feeling. As time passes, the candle slowly burns low and dies. Moonlight falls in the silver bars across Lord Hoster's still face, while faint music drifts from the yard, Rymon's sad love song about a maid with sunset hair. Catelyn loses track of time until Brienne appears softly at the door, reminding her that midnight has come. Catelyn rises, thinking, "Midnight has come, father, and I must do my duty." And that's the thing. She wants to get answers. She wants to know more about what's going on. And even she might be contemplating what she's going to do about Jaime. She might even be conflicted right now. Is she going to free him, kill him? If she's not even decided if she's going to do that, but she's keeping it in the back of her mind. That's all the things playing on Catelyn's mind. They go to the dungeons, where a drunken red-nosed man objects that no one can see the Kingslayer without Edmure's sealed permission. But Catelyn's voice once again goes into that Lady Stoneheart voice as it turns cold. "Has my father died and no one told me?" The man falters and obeys, fumbling with his keys until he finds the right one for Jaime's cell. And that's the obvious thing. You're not going to deny the daughter of the current lord. That's just something you're not going to do. That's going to get you in trouble, all that kind of stuff. She orders him back to his ale once the door is open, and takes down the oil lamp to light her way. "Brienne," she commands, "see that I am not disturbed." Brienne nods and stations herself outside, one hand on her sword hilt, and tells Catelyn to call for her if she has need. As we get into page 594. Catelyn enters the dark, foul-smelling dungeon beneath Riverrun. The stench of filth and rot thicken the air. She can hear the rush of the river through the stone. Her lamplight shows a pail of overflowing waste and Jaime Lannister huddled in the corner. He is no longer the proud man who looks all good in his finery. He's kind of been reduced to how Ned was at the end of Book 1. The wine she'd sent was sitting untouched. She thinks grimly about this, as her ploy is not necessarily working as well as she would have hoped. Jaime raises his chained hands to his face, his voice hoarse from long silence, as he greets her, but he fears he is in no condition to receive her. Catelyn commands him to look at her, but Jaime kind of blinks at this. And remember, the way we saw Ned. Ned was somebody that hadn't seen light in long periods of time. He didn't know how many days had passed. The same is also true for Jaime. But Catelyn saw his wasted and filthiness, his beard long and gold in the lamplight, his hair a tangled mess. Yet even in this state, he had a beauty and arrogance still to show. Catelyn notes that he had not touched the wine, but Jaime responds a bit suspiciously to this, and obviously you should. Given that one random day you get sent wine, why is that? Who in the castle would want you to have any type of pleasantry at all? Likely it could be poison. And Catelyn questions this. Why would I poison you? Like, I could have you killed at any point. But for Jaime, it's a really smart remark. Death by poison can seem natural. Now, think about that line. We're going to get so much into Littlefinger and how Littlefinger should not be somebody that Catelyn trusts, but here's that subtle line. Death by poison can seem natural, whereas taking someone's head off, you can't claim it was an accident. That's a great line by Jaime and foreshadows so many undertones that Catelyn's trying to figure out. As his eyes adjust, he peers up at her as he makes another joke about not having a chair. Catelyn says she can stand well enough, but even Jaime mocks Catelyn here as he tells her that she looks terrible. But you have to remember, Catelyn probably does look terrible. She's been visibly probably aging based on the stress she's going through, the grief. She isn't her normal self. His wrists and ankles were shackled, the chains fixed to the wall, so he could neither stand or lie flat. He couldn't have really any type of comfort, as Jaime taunts her about his chains as well. Catelyn says that you brought this on yourself, as we gave you a tower cell fitting your station and you tried to flee. And can you blame Jaime, though? Trying to escape captivity, it's not the best situation. Any type of freedom here, you're going to try and take it. Jaime says a cell is a cell, and some under Casterly Rock make this one in Riverrun look like a palace, more or less, like a great situation. And even you think about the black cells with Ned seemed like he was in a much worse state than what Jaime currently is. Catelyn notes that he hides any fear well, but says that a man in chains should keep a more courteous tongue, she warns. Jaime smirks, saying, "No, then surely you came for pleasure." He more or less taunts Catelyn about trying to sleep with him and all of that kind of stuff, and It's not what Catelyn wants. Slowly, this conversation is spinning out of control. As we get into page 595, Catelyn stares at Jaime in disgust, thinking there has never been a man so beautiful and so vile. And that's the whole part of it, is that when you think about the way Sansa looks at people, where the beautiful people have to be the good people, and you think about how she views people that aren't as, good looking, it's that part of it that makes this series so great, is that Jaime is such a morally complex character. And even in this moment where we start to understand him more, he still comes off as just an arrogant asshole. She warns him about his taunts, saying that if Robb had heard that, he would have killed him. Jaime mockingly replies that Robb would only dare if Jaime was still chained, just implying that Robb would never face Jaime in a sword fight, and why would you? Robb's quite wise to do that. Catelyn defends her son's intelligence and courage, noting Jaime made no challenges when he still had an army. Jaime sneers, asking if the old kings of winter hid behind their mothers as well. Catelyn grows tired of his arrogance, saying there are things that she must know. But if you're Jaime, why would you tell her anything? She's not giving you anything, so why should you care? But Catelyn answers that it might save his life. Jaime laughs, saying he doesn't fear his death, and for Jaime, he might even have kind of accepted his own death, given he's been caught. Most people in the Northern Army want him dead. He's kind of started to maybe come to accept it. Does this not reflect Ned's chapter in the Black Cells, where he also, when talking to Varys, is like, I don't really care about my life all that much. I'm a soldier. I've been prepared to die for how long? The same kind of idea is here with Jaime as well. Catelyn tells him that he should care about his death and that his crimes will damn him to the deepest hell if the gods are just. Remember, we just got done talking about in this chapter how Catelyn feels conflicted on her feelings about the gods and why they would do the horrible things that they've done to her family. But then here, she also backs it up against Jaime. Jaime mocks her faith, scoffing at the gods Ned Stark prayed to, and says they didn't save him when Cersei took his head. And that gets to the point of the whole thing that Catelyn was thinking about. The gods didn't protect any of these people that we know of are good people or are innocents, so why should they believe in them? He argues that if gods exist, the world would not be full of pain and injustice. But Catelyn answers that men like him are the cause of the world's evil. And it's a really interesting point here is, if there are a higher power, why do they allow, humans or whatever to do the things that we do? And in a lot of ways, Catelyn is right. It is because of people that treat others horribly, that abuse or use people, all these different things. But Jaime smirks and says that there are no men like me. There's only me. Catelyn thinks him arrogant and soulless, realizing she's wasting her breath. She tells him to do what he wants with the wine and turns to leave. But as she's about to go, Jaime stops, asking her to stay, claiming that his courtesies have been lacking because of being in prison. But you almost see this hint of, I would say, more fear in Jaime, where Jaime in a lot of ways I think is afraid to go back into the darkness, to not talk to anyone for days and not hearing any information. I think it's a little bit of that as well. He offers to answer questions, but only for a price. Catelyn refuses the idea that a captive can set terms, which Catelyn is right, he is a prisoner, he can't really demand things. But if you do want to get information, this is the best way to do it. Jaime insists his price is small. He wants answers to his own questions, since he has only been told lies about his sister and father. He proposes an exchange. She answers his questions, and he'll answer hers. But Catelyn demands to know if he'll speak truthfully. And this is where we get back to that line that I hinted at earlier. Jaime warns her that truth is often unpleasant, quoting Tyrion. People hunger for truth, but seldom like the taste. And that is the truth, that most people, when they hear the truth, would rather have not even known. One of the most, I think, common ones of these are people sometimes want to know, is your spouse cheating on you? Or is your boyfriend, your girlfriend, whatever, cheating on you? And then when they find out that information, it's almost like they would rather have not have known. And they would have rather just it kept going, because that can lead to a divorce and the instability of now you don't have a partner. It's interesting the way that goes down. And that's not me saying people should cheat or even allow their partners to cheat, but you see that from people. That truth is something that you want, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's something that once you get it, that you're happy with it. But Catelyn says she's strong enough to hear anything he has to say, as we get into page 596. Jaime asks for the wine as Catelyn hangs the lamp and brings it close so he can drink. He sips and calls it sour and vile. It's the same that Catelyn also described it as a lot of this conversation has been so far. But then he asked Lady Catelyn for her first question. Catelyn, not sure how much she's going to get out of Jaime, goes straight to the question she wants to know most importantly. She asks directly, are you Joffrey's father? As Jaime more or less says, if you have to ask the question, you already know the answer. But Catelyn wants it from his own lips, and he says that yes, Joffrey is his and the rest of Cersei's, he supposes. Catelyn then presses him, saying that you admit to being your sister's lover. Jaime answers matter-of-factly that he's always loved Cersei and then turns the interrogation back on her. He asks, do all my kin still live? Catelyn reports that Sir Stafford Lannister was slain at Oxcross, but Jaime shrugs it off. He doesn't care about some of these distant relatives. He wants to know about his close family. Catelyn confirms that they are all still alive in terms of Cersei, Tyrion, and Tywin, but hopes that they will die soon, but then asks the question that she really came to ask. How did my son Bran come to fall? And this is the crazy thing for Catelyn. She's not expecting Jaime to answer this bluntly or to give her a real answer, but Jaime is blunt and chilling. He flung Bran from a window. And this breaks Catelyn's heart even more. You know, just the fact that not only has she been told that her son's died, and she's come to the realization that Arya also might be dead, she now has been told that Jaime Lannister tried to also kill Bran, and then Bran was tried to be killed again. It's all these reveals that have been building up for 2 books now, and they're finally all coming out. And the easy way that Jaime even admits it stuns Catelyn. She tries to remind him of his oath to protect the weak, but Jaime retorts that Bran was weak enough, and even accuses the boy of spying on them. And I think one thing I've really looked into of the character of Jaime specifically, because of my friend Becky Does Blog, great channel by the way, check her out, is that she's a really big, I don't like Jaime type of person, and I totally understand that. And so I've kind of looked at the books more, and when you get exchanges like this from Jaime, where he completely doesn't care about Bran's life, he is not even really feeling remorse for crippling someone for their entire life and trying to kill them, and even accuses that person of spying when he's the one banging his sister literally in Winterfell. Just saying, there's a little bit of accountability that is not there from Jaime. Catelyn rejects that excuse and accuses Jaime of intending Bran's death, and Jaime admits he meant for Bran to die. He doesn't hide away from that fact. He says, I seldom fling children from towers to improve their health. Yes, I meant for him to die. Catelyn would have killed him right then and there if she had a dagger on her, but she doesn't, and she also has to restrain herself. She knows that Sansa's safety depends upon Jaime. Catelyn accuses him of hiring the Catspaw with Silver to finish the deed when Bran had survived. But Jaime denies this, saying killing Bran personally would have been simpler. And here's the issue that Catelyn runs into, is that Jaime explains for killing Bran, he would have had to have killed like everybody in Winterfell. Catelyn was with Bran all the time. It was just not feasible. Killing Bran seemed impossible. And so when Catelyn, presses him, Jaime swears on his honor as a Lannister that he never sent the killer. Furious at this and all the things Catelyn's going through, she kicks over the waste pail, mocking his honor. Jaime admits he may have shit for honor, but insists he never hires others to do his killing. If he wanted Bran dead, he would have done it himself. And Catelyn at this is horrified to realize this is the truth. Something's not adding up here. It didn't seem like it was Tyrion, and Catelyn realizes that in book 1. But now it also doesn't seem to be Jaime or Cersei either. But Catelyn's ready to conclude that it might not have been Jaime either. Then if it wasn't Jaime, then it has to be Cersei, right? And that's what Catelyn asks Jaime. But Jaime denies this too, claiming Cersei keeps no secrets from him. Ironic, given what's going to happen in the next 2 books with that. But it is true, like Cersei would have gone to Jaime about killing Bran. Catelyn turns her accusation towards Tyrion then, saying the assassin carried his dagger. Jaime is puzzled by this, asking what dagger she means, as she describes a Valyrian steel blade with a dragon bone hilt. It's something that would stand out, being Valyrian steel, and for a minute Jaime does seem puzzled by this, but eventually he does recall it. But Catelyn says Tyrion won it from Littlefinger, betting on Jaime's joust against the Knight of Flowers. But at this point, Catelyn's wait a second. How would Tyrion have won the dagger? because Tyrion would have ended up losing. Loras is the person that wins that joust. So if we're going off of all this stuff, how does that even make any sense? And so Jaime corrects her, saying that Tyrion always bet on him, but that day he lost because Loras unhorsed Jaime. And so all of this is coming crashing down. Both Tyrion and Jaime are giving the exact same story. And now you have something that seems to show that Jaime and the Lannisters seem to be innocent in this. So if that's the case, why was Littlefinger lying to her about that? And that's what's going to get to the heart of a lot of the issues and some of the really interesting parts of this chapter. Jaime remembers Robert showing him the same dagger at the feast afterward, mocking him as usual when drunk. But Catelyn recalls Tyrion once told her this exact story, and doubts start to swirl. How would both of the brothers tell the exact same tale when they haven't seen each other since Winterfell? The assassination happened after, Tyrion had already left, and Jaime, they haven't even talked about this assassination even happening. There's no way they would have the exact same story. Catelyn wonders aloud if Jaime is trying to deceive her, and that this must be a trap. But she just couldn't place it, and it was a trap, but her past and her, her childish love or brotherly love towards Littlefinger is blinding her to the real problem. As she gets into page 598, Jaime dismissively tells Catelyn he's already admitted to crippling Bran. Lying about a dagger would gain him nothing. And that's the truth. If Jaime is stone cold, gonna tell her, yeah, I wanted to kill your son, and admitting to all these things, why deny that you went another step forward and tried to have him killed again? It just doesn't make any sense. But as Jaime drinks more wine, he claims he no longer cares what people say about him and demands his turn to ask questions. We know Jaime does care about what people think about him, but that's what he shows to the world. It's what so many of us try to show to the world, that we don't care about what people say about us. Jaime asks if Robert's brothers have taken the field. Catelyn confirms this, but she doesn't really elaborate on it, and Jaime is not happy about it and tells her, I want more details, or your next answer is not going to be as good. Catelyn reluctantly tells him that Stannis is marching on King's Landing, and that Renly is dead and murdered by his brother through some dark magic. Jaime expresses kind of just I don't even think regret, but he's just yeah, I kind of liked Renly, but calls Stannis quite another tale. Then asks which side the Tyrells support. It's interesting the way that George constantly seems to be giving us little alerts every other chapter, hey, what's up with the Tyrells? This huge faction and army that nobody is really seeing, and they haven't declared for anybody yet. It's really interesting the way that George does that, because really, we're going to get into the Battle of the Blackwater within the next 5 chapters. And so when you think about that, we're not going to have time to think about, where are the Tyrells? What's going on there? We're at this point now. Tywin and the Tyrells are coming to save the day at the Battle of the Blackwater, which is going to happen very shortly. So it's really interesting the way George does that he puts that back into your mind. Catelyn says they had supported Renly, but doesn't know their stance now. Jaime knows that Robb must be feeling alone, but Catelyn corrects him, saying Robb has become a man and a king, victorious in all his battles and his latest at the Crag. Jaime asks if Robb has faced Tywin yet, but Catelyn says when he does, he'll defeat him as he defeated you. Now, this is the whole point of it, is Robb's victories don't mean a whole lot until he takes on Tywin, and that's the war. If Robb can beat Tywin, the war is over. But at this point, Robb still hasn't fought Tywin. Now, we do know that Robb's plan was to fight Tywin. It was to bring Tywin into the west and then try to beat him there, all this kind of stuff. And Edmure kind of destroys that, but that's really Robb's fault. So, yeah. Jaime claims Robb took him by surprise, didn't actually defeat Jaime, a craven's trick. Catelyn retorts that Jaime has no right to speak of tricks, reminding him Tyrion sent cutthroats under a peace banner, and Jaime shrugs, saying any brother would do the same if one of his own were captured. And that is the case. If Robb could, for instance, get Sansa free somehow, feasibly, he would. Catelyn thinks painfully that her son has no brothers left, but keeps that silent. She doesn't need to tell someone like Jaime that information. Jaime continues drinking and cynically remarks, what's a brother's life when honor is at stake? And that's a real interesting point that really is getting to the heart of, I think, a lot of the issues Catelyn's going through. She wants to get Sansa back. Jaime notes that Tyrion is clever enough to know Robb will never ransom him, and Catelyn admits Robb's bannermen want Jaime dead, especially Rickard Karstark, whose 2 sons Jaime killed at the Whispering Wood. And that kind of goes back to the whole heart of the issue is Jaime realizes the likelihood of him living are extremely low. The odds of Jaime going back and getting to his family and living his normal life are extremely low. The odds he's going to die pretty much grow as time goes on. Jaime remembers the Karstark boys vaguely, the two with the white sunburst, and says he killed them in fair combat, trying only to reach Robb. And that's the thing is, hate Jaime as much as you want, especially Lord Karstark, but it was war. This is what happens in war. You have to defeat your enemies, and Jaime defeated the Karstarks. There's no dishonorableness in that. Jaime was trying to win the battle, and the best way to do that was to kill Robb. So I can't really fault Jaime much for that. He argues that any knight would have done the same, and Jaime is completely correct. Catelyn, disgusted, asks how he can still call himself a knight when he's broken every vow he's ever sworn. And this is where we get into, in a lot of ways, the beginning of the quote-unquote Jaime's redemption arc, and where we see him in a different light. This all sets the stage for Jaime in A Storm of Swords and is vital to the story. As we get into page 599, Jaime refills his cup and begins ranting about the weight of conflicting vows, obeying the king, father, gods, laws, and protecting the innocent, saying it's impossible to honor them all. And we know what Jaime is hinting at. He's hinting at everything that he did during King's Landing and saving the whole population, but in turn, he also went against, the king, and everybody views him as this horrible person, but yet his vows completely conflicted. No matter what action he took, he was disobeying some vow or another, and that's the point he's making. He leans back, closing his eyes, recalling how he'd been the youngest man to ever join the King's Guard, but Catelyn cuts in coldly, saying that he was also the youngest to betray it. And Jaime seems mildly amused by this, toasting to Aerys II, the king he slew, laughing about the red and gold of the king's blood matching Lannister colors. And this is where it gets into it, where Jaime is now starting to get drunk, and it's starting to get to some more sensitive issues. Jaime, the one thing that defines him is both his best and how the public views him, his worst moment. Catelyn realizes he's drunk and tells him only a man like him would take pride in such an act. But Jaime replies there are again no men like him and asks if Ned ever told her how his father and brother died. In a lot of ways, it's like Jaime is trying to convince Catelyn of who he is as a person. In a lot of ways, it's subtle. Again, Jaime is still very arrogant, but why explain these things or even explain a way why you killed Aerys to Catelyn to begin with? It's because Jaime subconsciously does want to feel a little bit of that respect and to not be treated like the Kingslayer. Catelyn says they strangled Brandon while Rickard watched, then killed Rickard too, but she leaves out a lot of details and exactly how it went down. And Jaime presses her, asking how they died, and drinks deeply. When she hesitates, he offers to tell her, reminding her that she wanted truth. And that's the thing is, we very much see that Ned has hidden the truth from her and kind of hid the gruesome details. It's not something Ned wanted to relive either. And especially when you think about Brandon, who was somebody that was going to marry Catelyn, it's a dark story that you're never really going to want to tell someone like Catelyn. It's the same idea of like Sansa. Sansa is very innocent to those things, and Catelyn was hidden from some of the brutal stuff as well. Catelyn resists, saying that dead is dead, not wanting to hear, but Jaime mocks that Brandon was passionate, unlike Dead, and more like himself. And Jaime comparing himself to Brandon is just too much for Catelyn. But as we get into page 600, Catelyn recalls Brandon's companions, Ethan Glover, Jeffrey Mallister, Kyle Royce, and Albert Aaron, and explains that only Glover survived, as Aerys accused them of treason, summoned their fathers, and killed all without trial. Very interesting that Ethan Glover actually survives. Is it because he was like a squire? What was the reasoning there? And I think that's a very interesting question maybe we'll make a video on, but not sure. Jaime corrects her, saying there were trials of a sort, as Rickard Stark demanded trial by combat, and Aerys granted it, declaring fire to be House Targaryen's champion. Jaime describes in chilling detail how Rickard was suspended over a slow fire, forced to prove his innocence, while he was burned and cooked alive. At this, Brandon had been brought in with a strangling cord around his neck, his sword just out of reach, and he strangled himself, struggling to save his father. And this is what's so horrible is, all these people are like, oh, well, Jaime went against his king and all this stuff. And we just look at how vile of a human being Aerys was. He tortured people that, got them killed. And I will point this out. I made a big point of this in my Robert's Rebellion series. I want to point out, Brandon did publicly threaten to kill the heir to the Iron Throne. I totally understand why Brandon might have needed to be killed or imprisoned, but the manner in which it was done, and then also killing Rickard, doesn't make any sense. That's the thing that really steps over the line. Jaime vividly recounts watching as Rickard's armor glowed red, his gold spurs melted, and he himself stood guard in the white armor, distracting himself by thinking of Cersei and trying to think of anything else than this because, well, he has to keep his oaths. That's his oath, to protect the king and, obey him. But yet, isn't he supposed to protect people that are, innocent? Well, okay, Rickard Stark has not done anything wrong, but here he is being killed. Afterward, Sir Gerald Hightower the White Bull had told him, "You swore a vow to guard the king, not to judge him." And you see that. You see that right away, that the King's Guard are something that Jaime almost could never live up to because they would, allow for their king to do this stuff. Jaime couldn't. And that makes, in a lot of ways, Jaime better than them in a lot of ways. And that's something that nobody can see. Catelyn, horrified and sickened, admits Aerys was mad, but doubts Jaime slew him to avenge the Starks. And Jaime didn't say that. Jaime didn't say that was the reason he did it. Jaime is trying to point to the idea that Aerys was a horrible king. He was a terrible human being. And the reason he killed him was because of those things. Not because of, he wanted the Starks to love him or whatever, or to avenge them. That's not at all what was happening. And Jaime confirms that. He says that the Starks meant nothing to him, but laments how he's loved by one for a kindness he never did and hated for his finest act. We know this is why Jaime believes it's his finest act, because he saved hundreds of thousands to millions of people, and yet he's hated for that. But then by others, he's loved for the thing he did, but not for the right reasons. He recalls kneeling before Robert at the coronation, forced to seek forgiveness alongside Pycelle and Varys. He sneers that Ned Stark should have kissed the hand that killed Aerys, but instead scorned him for sitting on Robert's throne. And we can totally understand why Ned didn't like Jaime, and it makes total sense. Jaime did not set himself up well. He kills the king, and then he sits on the Iron Throne and just doesn't seem to be bothered by it at all. As we get into page 601, he sneers about Ned's faithfulness to Robert. He even mocks Catelyn straight to her face, talking about Ned, how he might have loved Robert more than Catelyn because Ned cheated on Catelyn and had a bastard, and asking about Jon Snow's name and all of that kind of stuff. And even saying that in his own way, Jaime was more faithful to Cersei than Ned ever was to Catelyn. And it's just growing, that tension. Everything's boiling over until Catelyn calls for Brienne. And this is the moment that is so amazing because on your read, you don't know what this means. Catelyn calls for Brienne and then asks for her sword, and then the chapter ends. Does Catelyn intend to kill Jaime? I think that's definitely the way a lot of people would have interpreted it on your first read, because it's not really like the show. The show makes it quite obvious, yes, he's about to be freed from prison. Even in the show, it builds up to that moment, like, okay, Jaime is going to die if they don't move him in the show, whereas in the book, it's very unclear what's about to happen here. And George plays with that cliffhanger quite a lot. And so we won't see this plot line until the next book. We don't see Catelyn until A Storm of Swords. We will see Jaime in A Storm of Swords. This is the end of this plot line. And I want to just, for a few minutes here, just talk about Catelyn in this book. Catelyn, to me, is a character that, yes, her Renly's Peach chapter always stood out to me as being one of my favorites of the entire series, and especially of Catelyn. And I'd always appreciated Catelyn for this book, but I'd always found that I always enjoyed Catelyn more in book 3 and then in book 1. But I think this reread has made me treasure Catelyn even more, to the point where I think she is my favorite POV. I think she's the best POV in the story. I just don't think she has any real bad chapters. She has chapters that are maybe more setup or filler kind of chapters. But throughout A Clash of Kings, I think basically every one of her chapters outside of maybe her first chapter as at least a top 20 chapter in the entire Clash of Kings reread. And I don't know where the chapter is going to be placed, because I originally thought this might be one of her middle of the pack chapters, but after reading it, it's fantastic. I mean, the way that George is able to depict grief and loss and very difficult themes, and it all be painted in a very realistic light. And the way that he wrote this character, I can definitely tell in this chapter that George wrote this character based on his own personal experiences with loss and, maybe past relationships. And even, the way George has felt, I think, for the last few years, especially, I would say before Comic-Con and Night of the Seven Kingdoms, he looked really happy there. But when we go back to, was it BookCon? I forget what the actual con it was that was happening over on the West Coast that JC ended up going to, or the Advocate. And he looked a lot more depressed. He looked a lot more, like I think how Catelyn feels in this chapter. And I just think the way that he crafted this chapter, where it's not only is it a payoff to Catelyn's character arc throughout the whole series, really, at this point, it also has these great moments where we're uncovering the foundation of the story. The mystery of who tried to kill Bran, and the idea that's going to point towards Joffrey, and the idea that Littlefinger, covering up all this stuff, he's been lying to Catelyn, all that kind of stuff coming out in this chapter. It's great because it does so much for Catelyn, but then this is also like, in a lot of ways, this is like Jaime's first POV chapter. It's not from Jaime's point of view, but the conversation we get here is the most honest conversation we've had with Jaime. And this is something that's very different in the book, in the show. Whereas in the show, we get a lot more of Jaime, like added scenes with his character, especially in season 1. Even like his scenes in season 2, they break up. Like, so there's multiple conversations that Catelyn has with Jaime, whereas there's a conversation she has in the episode 10 of season 1 after Ned's been killed and he's in prison. We also see Robb visiting Jaime in episode 1 of season 2, I believe. And then you see it again with Catelyn when she actually releases him. So we see a lot more into the character of Jaime before he becomes like a main character, I would say, in season 3 in the show. In the book, we don't see much of this character at all. Like, this is the only time we see this character throughout the entire second book. The first book, we see him a little bit at the open, and then we see him through like one Ned POV, and then he's just like gone from the story until like Battle of the Whispering Wood. So I think this is a great chapter. It is just one of those that, why I love A Clash of Kings so much is that it builds perfectly into A Storm of Swords as well, but also tells its own complete narrative. And this is like the narrative of Catelyn and her breaking of her family, of her mental state, of her rational decisions. And yeah, I think Catelyn is just fantastic in this book. So let me know what you guys think. A very somber chapter for me to finish off, because not only is it a depressing read, for me, this is the last time we're going to touch the Catelyn character and her POVs for probably a good amount of time. I won't say like a year, but I mean, it'll probably be another 6 months before we hit another Catelyn chapter. I mean, we've got to finish out A Clash of Kings, and then I like to take breaks between books just to give myself a little bit of like preparation, and then we'll start A Storm of Swords. But even then, we don't have a lot of Catelyn left. We've got about a half a book left for the character in A Storm of Swords, and it's depressing because, one thing that when I finally got to Ned's death in the first book on my reread, it was like, I'd been with the character for so long. I've been talking about Ned for, a year, and talking about him basically every like 3 weeks, it felt like. And then all of a sudden that character just ends, and you've gone on this great journey with the character. It's kind of the way I'm starting to feel with Catelyn as we're kind of winding down that story for her. And so yeah, thank you guys all for watching. I hope you guys really did enjoy this one. It's a highly rated one for me personally. And I'll see you guys all in next week's video, as we'll be talking about Theon. Bye guys.